Okie dokie. So, hands up who has seen Oppenheimer? Okay, better hit rate than last week. In a moment, we will watch the trailer so that you can kind of at least kind of feel like you've got some understanding of what it was if you hadn't seen it before. Essentially, I want to say to you, unsurprisingly, that Oppenheimer 2 is a deep film. You won't be able to read them because I've put it on a ridiculously small font, but there are all sorts of questions that, for me, were raised by Oppenheimer. These included, what is the relationship between scientific progress and human warfare? What do we value most about people, their contribution or their character? Why? What else? Is the greatest good for the greatest number a good way to make moral decisions? Does nuclear deterrence work, and should Christians support it? And a number of others that I've written there, and you might be interested to reflect on those yourselves. But we're not going to think about any of those, I'm afraid, as much as that would be interesting and no doubt profitable. We're going to be thinking about the nature of science and human nature. First of all, Hetty, could we please have the trailer? I mean, even the trailer's good, isn't it? It is a pretty impressive bit of cinema. I'm not a film buff, but if you've seen it, it's 3 hours long, and it feels epic as you're watching it. Okay, let's have a little think about it. The story of Oppenheimer obviously follows the scientist or mathematician Robert Oppenheimer, and in a sense, you could see it as the story not just of Oppenheimer, but of the 20th century writ large. In that, and maybe that's why it's of epic length, because its scope is vast. It's the story of humanity, in a sense, reaching a scientific pinnacle. And the science is absolutely, it's 80 years ago. It's amazing. And so in this story, it's the kind of pinnacle. Rationalism and scientism have reached their zenith, but all in the context of humans doing what humans have done for millennia, which is destroying one another. And Oppenheimer then is like the perfect figurehead for that story as a secular New York Jew. That's obviously resonant given the period that we're looking at. His creed, apparently, as a younger man, was as follows. So he didn't adhere to his own Jewish faith. He really rejected it. He said, I believe in the second law of thermodynamics, in Hamilton's principle, in Bertrand Russell. That was his creed that he lived by. He was a scientific positivist. Truth was discovered scientifically or not at all. And so the film raises, I think, some fascinating questions for the 21st century, for our time, as we look back on those events. And as I say, I've listed lots and lots of questions there, and you could think of others that you may have thought of as you were watching it. Big questions that we should wrestle with as Christians, as humans. And again, like Barbie, it's a film which is dealing with deep stuff in a very deliberate way. Maybe more kind of obvious to us than Barbie might have first seemed. But it is deliberately dealing with deep stuff, and you get it straight away at the beginning of the film. Did you notice the quotation that there was there at the beginning? Prometheus, the Greek myth in which Prometheus steals fire from the gods and gives it to humanity, only to be punished for eternity by an eagle eating his liver, which kind of is healed each night, and then it's fresh to be eaten again all the next day. It's a horrible punishment. The issues grappled, what that's saying with, I think, is starting off saying, look, Prometheus, which has become this symbol of scientific endeavor, by the way, that's why he kind of starts with Prometheus. But if you think about the issues that Prometheus, the Greeks are wrestling with, well, it's the same in this 20th century epic. So the issue that they're kind of grappling with is what humanity will do with this powerful gift. For Prometheus, it was fire. Here it's the atom bomb. Will scientific endeavor lead to unintended consequences? Is it possible to be used rightly, this power that Oppenheimer is unleashing? And within the kind of macro discussion, the big discussion of is it possible to use nuclear bombs rightly, is there such a thing as using them rightly, is also, so alongside that, is also the more granular view of Oppenheimer's personal life. And he is cast very much in the line of the flawed genius. He's a mathematical visionary, but a dilettante and adulterer. And maybe part of the rationale for those of us who've watched it and were maybe a little bit kind of felt the sex scenes were a bit gratuitous. Maybe part of the rationale for that kind of quite in-your-face sex scenes was to underscore that side of his character, to underscore his humanity and maybe his flawed humanity. So here is a complex man at the heart of the most complex moral problem of the 20th century. That's kind of the film. Two really basic things that I think we can consider before we then think about what is our faith, or how we might be sharing our faith and with those who might be engaging with this film. Two basic things to observe. One, science is absolutely amazing. Very profound observation for you. As I say, the events and the scientific breakthroughs of that film that we've watched are now about 80 years ago. And yet most of us don't really understand the scientific principles that they're discussing. The science is truly breathtaking. Nuclear fusion, nuclear fission. Richard Merrin can explain the difference to you afterwards. Quantum physics. It's astonishing. I'm sure lots of other people can as well. 20 years later, of course, humans would propel themselves to the moon. So the achievements of modern science are absolutely remarkable. Einstein had kind of changed the Newtonian paradigm with his theory of relativity, and now this new quantum theory was changing things again, and it's all this very exciting period of physics and science. And so the scientific progress mapped out in the film is astonishing. People like Oppenheimer are absolutely phenomenal brains. And as Christians, the first thing I think we should do is celebrate the brilliance of science. We should be champions of science. Because too often, and I'm not going to go into that now, but too often science and Christian faith have been pitted against one another. There's another whole interesting story as to why that's a myth. But they have been pitted against one another. And so we should be champions of science and say, this is amazing. Isn't science incredible? Aren't the discoveries and these things absolutely amazing? So that's the first observation. Science is amazing. Second, and this is maybe a little bit more thought-provoking, science is limited. And I think really that's the crux of the whole film, is the limitations of science. It's about this amazing breakthrough, but really it's about the limitations of science. And the film, I think, punctures two particular contemporary maybe a bit strong to call them lies, but two contemporary assertions which relate to science. And one, not bought into by everyone, of course, but by many, and that is that scientific progress is our hope for the future. It's a view which has been popular since the Enlightenment, perhaps from before. Essentially, it was a time when philosophy, which undergirds science, turned towards putting a huge emphasis on human reason, and reason becomes the thing. So one example of that, Immanuel Kant, great philosopher, seeks to conceive of morality without the need for God, but pure reason alone. And that's kind of emblematic of that period. We don't need God anymore, we shall have reason. That's the philosophical foundations, if you like, for someone like Oppenheimer, or a modern-day Dawkins or a Sam Harris. And crucially for us, maybe some of our friends or family who've kind of imbibed that scientific view of the world. And according to that view of the world, we need only run society based on purely rational and scientific basis for progress to occur. And so for a couple of hundred years or more, it's led quite a few people to predict the death of religion, as religion will be shown, according to them, to be demonstrably false. We just need to look forward to this rational utopia. But films like Oppenheimer, I think, demonstrate the absurdity of that view. So for all our scientific progress, the nature of humanity has not really changed. And in the case of the mid-20th century, scientific progress meant newer and more efficient methods for the destruction of other humans. To speak of scientific progress being the hope for our future is naive in the extreme. And I think Oppenheimer actually makes that point very well. So the questions for our friends who might be in that kind of camp, even if they wouldn't necessarily express it that way, is if science is not our ultimate hope for the future, and if Oppenheimer puts the lie to that, what is your hope? Genuinely, what do you think is the hope for humanity in the future? If science isn't it, what is? That's the first little lie, perhaps. Second lie is that science is the only reliable knowledge. I found it interesting during the pandemic. Was I the only one that I found it really irritating, but maybe it was just me. The repeated refrain from Boris Johnson was, we're following the science. We're going to be led by the science, as if the science were a thing. It begged the question, well, which science? Immunology, virology, epidemiology? How about social science or psychology or healthcare economy? And of all these science, which data will you be following? I'm not too interested for now in the particularities of the COVID lockdowns and how justified they were. But in a more prosaic point, which is simply this, Boris Johnson, for all his flaws, is a master rhetorician, right? He knows how to speak to a crowd. And he knew that to speak of following the science would hit home to us. It would make him sound sensible and reliable. Why? Because sensible people are scientific, and stupid or dangerous people are religious. Why? Well, because implicitly, perhaps, the only knowledge which is true knowledge in our world is scientific knowledge. Now, again, not all our non-Christian friends will put it like that, and but many may hold views pretty similar to that, slightly unthinkingly. It's kind of the air we breathe. And again, I think Oppenheimer shows the absurdity of that view. Oppenheimer himself is a good scientist, and he refuses repeatedly to be drawn on the rights and wrongs of dropping the bomb. That simply isn't in the scientific remit, according to him, and yet it's pretty important knowledge to have. So science cannot speak of moral knowledge. It just doesn't, it's not in its language. It cannot speak of relational knowledge. And the film makes that point eloquently, if indirectly, that brilliance in science does not mean wisdom or maturity in relationships. At one point, that was that horrible moment in the film where he and his wife, Kitty, hand their child to their friends because they just can't do it. They basically say, we're awful people, sorry, we can't handle it. And you're like, you see that they really are flawed. If science can't speak on what we should do or how we should live and how we should love, then it seems fundamentally ill-equipped to be a worldview to live by. Do you see that? So that's maybe just two little punctures to that kind of idea. In contrast to the great limitations of a purely scientific worldview, here is what Christians can speak confidently about into this kind of world. I'd love us to be this kind of people. We can love and pursue science as we believe there is a reason to assume the world is rational. We assume the world is rational because we believe in a rational creator. And so it makes sense for us to celebrate science and to pursue it. So we can be scientific. Second, we can also explain, so Einstein talked about the miracle of the intelligibility of the universe. So for him, the biggest miracle was that we had half a brain to even begin to understand something about the universe. That wasn't naturally apparent to him. He called it a miracle. And we can explain that intelligibility miracle because we believe we are created in the image of the Creator who made it and who was rational. Third, we know the frailty and limitations of human beings. Sin is kind of our thing. We do well at that. And if you think about it, that idea of human frailty and limitation underpins scientific method. So the whole repeat is because you expect people to make mistakes. Repeat the experiment because you might have got it wrong. That's a Christian assumption. But it also, our understanding of human limitations makes us realistic about the scope of science and the scope of scientific knowledge. There is no scientific utopia to come from a Christian point of view. Fourth, in a world in which I hope this is significant, in a world in which scientific invention is everywhere and wisdom to live by is nowhere, Christians have something to say. So we believe in one who called himself the way. So to follow Jesus is to know how to live. We don't do it perfectly, ever, but we have someone to follow. So let's speak more of how Jesus helps us live well and wisely. I think that is genuinely something our world needs, right? And last one, in a world in which scientific invention brings new moral problems, so last century it was atomic bombs, this century maybe it's AI, we can speak about these things because we actually believe in moral language and moral categories. We believe in right and wrong. And we believe there is more to morality than the avoidance of harm, which is kind of our baseline for our society. So I want to say that the Christian faith affirms the wonder of science and at the same time puts it in its proper perspective. And we can be confident with what we believe. It's true, it's helpful, and increasingly it's unusual. And I think if we can testify to Jesus in the midst of that, it's a powerful testimony in today's world. Questions for you to discuss are on the sheet. Thanks.